Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local.
So, and I think we've kind of gone through most of the high level points here. I guess my sort of questions at the end of this are really for the EU regulators who sort of imposed this DMA on Google and other companies like them. What is success for them? I don't recall reading any statement from the EU. It hasn't been covered in any of the press on this. Like, what if the DMA is successful? Is there a certain percentage of clicks that aren't zero-click searches? Is there a certain percentage of clicks to quasi-competitors, in quotes, of Google, like TripAdvisor and Yelp, that they're trying to get those sites to a certain level? Are they considering consumer preference at all in this? I mean, certainly consumers were biased towards the pack based on its position, but I would say that the vast majority of consumers who stayed in the pack seemed perfectly happy with the quality of results they were getting, and that was actually a good experience for them. So I think that there's still a lot of questions around the DMA that the EU regulators should be thinking about that I haven't seen them come out with.
They
with
definitely
any kind of public statements around. So
they definitely have not thought through criteria to evaluate success. I mean, these are general rules that apply across the board to very different situations. Apple and Microsoft are different than Google, which is different than TikTok. The central proposition in this context is: are you self-preferencing, meaning are you favoring your own property or your own tool versus competitors? So it's pretty general, and they're going to have to formulate those rules on a case-by-case basis, because they didn't know what Google was going to do in response, and so certainly they have no pre-existing idea that module A or module B has to perform at a certain level in order to determine this is a success. I mean, I think this is going to be a very thorny exercise for them to go through, because there are going to be a lot of people saying a version of what we said, which is these SERP features are not really changing user behavior. So what now? I think that's a very difficult question to answer, because you can't really mandate that Google is going to put specific competitors in specific positions on the SERP. That's not going to happen. And so how do you determine whether this is working?
But I would say if they really want to stop Google from self-preferencing, they have to get Google to remove the pack entirely, or make it a sort of one button off to the side, or one of the chips that they introduce at the top, because the pack is just so visually dominant and very engaging for consumers. We saw about 30% of consumers click the more businesses button at the bottom of the pack and get into the Finders theme, showing that they were looking for more of those kinds of results. So I think there's definitely a tension between, what's ultimately going to comply with not self-preferencing and what European searchers actually want when they get to a Google search result. So it'll be interesting to see, how the EU regulators resolve that.
Yeah, I don't know where SGE stands, the rollout stands in Europe. I think it may be available in some places and not others. I'm not sure about that. But one thing that's been found so far is that the local results are one of the dominant SGE. They're one of the most frequently occurring SGE features, which is partly a response to user behavior, right? I mean, you're looking for local information, so it's kind of a new pack. And how is that going to play with this anti-self-preferencing mandate? I mean, isn't it sort of similar, or maybe it'll be more acceptable if they treat it as just another sort of version of organic? I don't know, but it's pretty interesting to think about that. So any final comments, advice, predictions that you guys want to lay out here before we adjourn this week?
I am not going to predict anything as it relates to regulation. I think that Google, there are a lot of smart people working at Google, and I think that they really threaded the needle of what will appear to be a reasonable solution to regulators that they would accept, and also something that really doesn't change their bottom line. Oh, interesting. On the bottom line front, I was fascinated. There were only ads on about 20% of the search results that we saw. So this is not a heavily monetized category. So it's not like a, pressing the tinfoil hat society right here, but that's not what's happening. It does seem to be that Google is trying to give users what they want. showing packs at the top because 60% of people, engage with those, and 50% of them on mobile devices never leave the pack. So, or never leave the local finder. So I think that's, I do think that, there's some, for somebody who's such a conspiracy theorist like me in terms of every decision Google makes being driven by revenue, this doesn't appear to be one of those categories.
And this layers on top of the fact that they've just discontinued their order entry system, which seemed like an opportunity for them to make some money on Google Pay or whatever, but that's gone too. So the other opportunity in restaurants, which was the order system for income, is gone. So have they given up on the vertical as an income resource?
Unclear. I mean, one of the things that is kind of paradoxical, or maybe not, is the idea that the position on the page drives awareness and drives clicks. Clicks drive rankings to some degree still. And so if you put something at the top of the page, although this is sort of contradicted by the decline of the Places Sites module, you put something at the top of the page, people become familiar with it, they click it, it stays at the top of the page, they look for it. It's kind of a virtuous cycle, self-fulfilling kind of thing to some degree.
Yeah, but I mean, think about, we saw something like 35 clicks to TripAdvisor overall, right? And 30 of those came from an organic result, and 5 of them came from a Places site result. So even on even when the Places site was present, consumers still preferred to click the organic listing for TripAdvisor.
Well, and that again speaks to the strength of the TripAdvisor brand, which is a lesson for, this is sort of the Airbnb approach. They went from investing huge resources in SEO and PPC, I think, to trying to build their brand so that people are choosing them or looking for them when they're doing these kinds of travel related searches. And far too many companies, I think, don't recognize the importance of brand. It's very, very hard to build one, especially in the local space, I think, if you're a small business. But I think it's something that really plays into user thinking about where they're clicking and who they're ultimately choosing. And this was something we saw in the medical vertical with ZocDoc. ZocDoc has a brand for many searchers. And as a consequence, it benefited disproportionately versus the other directories, which people were less familiar with. All right. So are we at the end? It seems like we've...
I was going to say just really quick and to close, I think you have to have both. You have to have a brand and you have to have good SEO, right? Yelp arguably has a brand.
For sure.
Their SEO was not as good as TripAdvisor's in Ireland, for sure. And so TripAdvisor, even if Yelp is sort of viewed more or less equivalently by the Irish consumer, the lack of consumers are reacting to what's put in front of them. And so you kind of need both if you're actually going to capture that click.
Yeah, I was not trying to argue that SEO is immaterial or important. Quite the contrary. People neglect it. You have to pay attention to it. You have to do all the best practices, but you also need to work on, familiarizing people with your brand, perhaps through other channels, and then you benefit. You're going to benefit in SEO because the more people choose you, the more Google will rank you. So, okay, Mike, any final thoughts before we adjourn for the week?
None from you.
Yeah, and I think we are going to be exposing more of this kind of stuff going forward. If you're interested, if you have any interest in learning more about the kind of research we're doing, you can just contact us and we can talk to you about that. But otherwise, thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.